Patients often see physicians as powerful. Administrators often see physicians as highly compensated professionals. But very few people understand what it feels like to be the person who ultimately carries responsibility when something goes wrong. My name is Dr. Aisha Rush, and welcome to episode 7 of Informed and Unfiltered, where we discuss the truth about medicine, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Today, we'll be discussing the loneliness, responsibility, and pressure of being the final decision maker, the loneliness that exists at the top. I want to credit this podcast to a very good and wonderful colleague of mine who sent me a message and said this was a topic that needed to be discussed. And I truly believe that. She is an amazing person, an amazing leader, and I've learned so very much from her. And I want to sincerely thank her. She knows who she is because she listens all the time. And I want to say thank you for everything that you've done and all that you continue to do on my behalf and for me. So let's get into the discussion. There is a side of medicine that patients rarely see, a side that medical students don't fully understand, a side that residents are only beginning to discover. It is the reality that once you become an attending physician, there is no longer a safety net. No attending looking over your shoulder, no senior resident double checking your work, no one reminding you that you forgot something. No one saying, watch out, you may want to think about this differently. The moment you become the attending physician, the responsibility becomes yours. And with that responsibility comes a level of pressure very few people understand. Today, we're talking about the loneliness of leadership in medicine, the weight of being the final decision maker, the pressure of knowing that when things go right, the team gets the credit. And when things go wrong, the physician often stands alone. But before we dive in, let's talk about a funny story here about when I transitioned from being a medical student to a resident. My first year of residency was a transitional year. This additional year of residency allowed me to learn different areas of specialization and made me a much more well-rounded OBGYN. My transitional year was very internal medicine heavy, actually, and I truly enjoyed internal medicine. I actually thought about going into internal medicine, but I really wanted to be a surgeon. So, I wanted to do procedures. And so I loved my training in internal medicine. I think it was amazing. And it definitely helped me to become a much more well-rounded person in this business. I was also able to do a full rotation of ICU, as well as radiology and pediatrics. I remember my ICU attending, Dr. Med. I'll never forget him. He was such a great teacher and motivator. I remember when I told him I wanted to eventually go into obstetrics and gynecology, and he looked at me and asked me why. I explained that I didn't want to bring people back from the dead. I wanted to bring life into the world. And he furrowed his eyebrows and was like, what? You don't love that? You don't love, bringing somebody back to life? And I was like, no, I would prefer to bring in life. And he looked at me and he told me I was too smart to be an OBGYN. I chuckled. I thanked him, but then I was like, what does that mean? I think of him often, and I think of him and that conversation a lot. And that conversation is one that has gotten me through some very tough times in this business. But all of my experiences during my training led to me being able to serve some amazing roles during my career. So I, personally completed 5 years of training as compared to most OBGYNs who complete 4 years of training. But on to my story. So very early in my intern year, I was placed on the CCU rotation or CCU unit. And for those who don't know, CCU stands for the Cardiac Care Unit. Because of this rotation, I'm still able to actually read EKGs and also able to pick up on the faintest heart murmurs and tell you what kind of murmur it is. It was a pretty amazing rotation. I learned quite a bit. But you definitely had to be on your toes on that rotation. because during my rotation, the unit had several critical patients, as you can imagine. I had never run a code. For those of you who don't know what a code is, it's when a patient flatlines and there is no cardiac activity, just to keep it simple. Well, I can tell you this, that ACLS training, my God, I'm glad I paid attention in class, because one night I heard a code blue announcement come over the overhead paging system, and the room number was announced. I realized it was my unit. I'm like, oh, Jesus. One of my friends from medical school was on the CCU rotation as a medical student, and we both ran to the patient's room to find the patient unresponsive with no cardiac activity on telemetry or EKG, whatever you want to call it, just to make it simple so people understand what I mean. And I looked around and said, call the doctor. And my friend said to me, you are the doctor. Oh my God, my brain had to shift gears so quickly that my head almost spun off my shoulders. I realized, OMG, I am the doctor. When the code team arrived, roles were announced and delegated, and I had to run that code. It was through God's grace that we got that patient back. But that was how I was introduced to the actual fact that I am a doctor. I laugh about that now, and I'm grateful the outcome was a good one. But I tell you, it was not an easy pill to swallow when you realize the true amount of responsibility that lies in the role of being a doctor. Now we get to the end of training. Throughout medical school and residency, there's always someone above you, someone reviewing your work, someone catching mistakes, someone providing guidance, someone helping you carry the burden. Then one day that changes. You become the attending. You become the person everyone calls. You become the person who has to make the decisions, the person who has to sign the chart, the person that has the final say. There is no one else to take on the burden of things not turning out right. You become the person whose name appears in the lawsuit, the person who may one day sit in a courtroom defending decisions made decades earlier. And that transition from training to attending can be both empowering, but also terrifying. This very idea of being the one responsible when a lawsuit comes about, the one who has to sit in a courtroom to defend a decision that was possibly even made during a time when the standard of care was different than it is now, but you are now being persecuted for not following the new standard of care that was only created 2 years ago, but the case occurred 10 years ago, and yet you're held to the new standard of care, but the case happened 10 years ago when the standard of care was different. This is why so many physicians practice defensive medicine. So not always why, but one of the reasons why, I should say. So what is defensive medicine, you ask? Many of us in highly litigious medical specialties know exactly what this is, but let's break it down here. Defensive medicine is the practice of ordering medical tests, procedures, treatments, or referrals, primarily to protect a healthcare provider from potential malpractice lawsuits rather than because they are medically necessary for the patient. There are two forms. Positive defensive medicine, doing extra things to reduce legal risk, such as ordering additional imaging, CT scans, MRIs, requesting more laboratory tests, referring patients to specialists more often. And then there's negative defensive medicine, avoiding high-risk patients or procedures that could lead to lawsuits, such as refusing to perform certain surgeries or avoiding treatment of very sick or complex patients. And believe me, I have definitely seen that time and time again. And some of this has been put right on my plate because some physicians do this very thing and they will not assume the risk, but they will allow you to take that torch and assume that risk, and they have no qualms about it. So now let's talk about an example. A patient with a simple headache and no warning signs may not medically need a CT scan. If a physician orders one mainly because they fear being sued for missing a rare brain tumor, that would be considered defensive medicine. So what are the effects of potential medicine? What are the potential effects, I should say, of defensive medicine? The benefits can be, you may occasionally detect unexpected conditions. You can potentially provide reassurance to patients and other clinicians that nothing major is going on. But there are drawbacks. And the drawbacks can be having to practice this type of medicine increases healthcare costs. It just does in some cases, many cases. It may sometimes expose patients to unnecessary risks. For example, radiation, false positive results, and positive complications from procedures. It sometimes can actually lead to overtreatment and patient anxiety. Defensive medicine is a major topic in healthcare policy because it affects both the cost and quality of medical care. So now let's talk about the myth of authority. People often assume that because physicians lead healthcare teams, they have complete control over patient care. Nothing could be further from the truth. Patient care is delivered by teams: nurses, technicians, pharmacists, therapists, consultants, residents, advanced practice providers, support staff. The physician is expected to coordinate all of those moving parts, but physicians do not directly control every action that takes place. Yet, when something falls through the cracks, everyone looks towards the physician. Why? Because leadership comes with responsibility, even when leadership doesn't come with complete control. One of the most exhausting parts of being a physician is the need to constantly anticipate problems, the constant vigilance. You're not simply treating what's in front of you. You're thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. What could happen next? What complication might develop? What result am I waiting for? What have I forgotten to document? What order hasn't been completed? Who needs to be notified? What am I forgetting? Physicians are constantly scanning for danger, not because we're paranoid, but because experience has taught us that patient outcomes often depend on details, small details, the kind of details that can change everything. So now let's talk about documentation and its significance. One of the harshest realities of medicine is this: if it isn't documented, it often doesn't exist. You may have spent 30 minutes counseling a patient. You may have reviewed risks, benefits, potential complications, and alternatives. You may have coordinated care among multiple team members. But years later, if it's not in the record, the assumption may be that it never happened. Documentation isn't simply paperwork. It's protection. It's communication. It's evidence. And sometimes it's the only thing standing between a physician and a devastating allegation. I remember when I got my first job out of residency, we didn't have an electronic medical record that you could actually chart in. You could order things in the somewhat of electronic medical record, but you couldn't go in like Epic or Cerner and have your beautiful notes already exploded. We were rural hospital, and these places can't afford Epic. And many of us who have Epic know you have to be part of a really large system to even afford that medical record, and Cerner is not very far behind. But needless to say, we had paper charts. So when you were busy in the office and had to run to labor and delivery to check on a laboring patient, you may not have had time to chart every single thing you said to the patient or all of the things you actually did when you evaluated the patient. Believe me when I say this came back to bite me so many years later. And for this reason today, I make sure that I chart everything from what a patient says in quotes to even the most benign physical exam findings. The idea of if it isn't charted, it didn't happen is real. And I am living proof of that. For this reason, I often coach my colleagues about how to chart certain things. And we've gone so far as even asking the legal experts how to chart things such that we don't become liable, because sometimes charting things the wrong way can also be detrimental. One of the most unsettling realities in medicine is that your decisions may be questioned decades later. Imagine being asked to remember a patient encounter from 20 years ago. These things actually happen. A lot of people, often think that these things are far-fetched, but they really actually do happen. Imagine trying to reconstruct events from a single chart note from 20 years ago. Imagine sitting in a deposition or courtroom defending decisions made in a completely different era of your life. Patients move on, hospitals change, staff members retire, treatment guidelines even change from 20 years ago. God knows how many things have changed, even talking about hypertension and pregnancy at this point. But the physician may still be called upon to explain what happened. That reality never really leaves you. And the time that has passed and lack of remembering, that doesn't matter to the attorney. You're supposed to have a memory of an elephant. You really are. But again, this is why documentation is so very important. It creates your timeline. It is your memory written. So what effects does this have on physicians? Honestly, as I have spoken to so many, and this is the reason why I do this podcast and a lot of the consulting work and other work that I do, because all of this often becomes an emotional burden. Physicians carry things they rarely talk about. The patient they couldn't save. The diagnosis they wish they had made sooner. The complication that occurred despite doing everything correctly. The outcome that still keeps them awake at night. Most physicians don't share these stories publicly, but they carry them, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. This emotional baggage changes our lives, for some in good ways and for others in not so good ways. This is why we sometimes see the rate of suicide amongst physicians growing or the amount of substance abuse climbing. We aren't given the opportunity to have an outlet to talk about these things. We don't want to seem weak or like we can't handle the job that comes with all of this. We definitely don't want to have to answer the question on applications about taking medications for things like depression and anxiety, because God forbid we're human. You may not get the job. And if people somehow think you're unstable because you had to answer, yes, you take medications, like that, then, that sometimes happens, and it's unfortunate. So while mental health has come a long way, well, in our business, we're not given the same grace, unfortunately. So with all of this, the important point that I want to drive home is this. Physicians need each other. One of the greatest challenges in medicine is isolation. Many physicians feel they must project confidence at all times. They feel they can't admit uncertainty, fear, or sadness. They can't show vulnerability. They can't acknowledge fear. But the reality is that medicine is too complex and too demanding to navigate alone. Physicians need each other. We need our colleagues. We need mentors. We need friends. We need people who understand the unique pressures of the profession. We may have spouses. Some of our spouses are not in medicine. And while we can come home and try to unload on them, and many of us do, God knows I do, it is so very different when you're talking to another physician and someone who can understand exactly what you mean when you talk about your frustrations or your fears or, sadness about a case or uncertainty. The reality is nobody really understands the weight of being a physician quite like another physician. This is why it's always important to find your tribe. Your tribe may not always be in one place. Your tribe may be all over the country. I know my tribe sure is all over the 50 United States. Wonderful people I've met along the way and who look out for me and me for them. It's amazing when you have a tribe. People you can open up to. People you can call on when you need to phone a friend. People you share your frustrations and fears with. It sincerely changed my life when I stopped practicing medicine as a solitary person to one who has a tribe that cares and will be there no matter what. So I encourage all of you listening, no matter what industry you're in, you cannot navigate this world alone. Find your tribe. When you do, you will be amazed at how your life and world changes. Medicine can be one of the most rewarding professions in the world, but it is also one of the heaviest. Every day, physicians make decisions that affect lives. Every day, they carry responsibilities most people will never experience. And while patients often seek confidence, expertise, and authority, behind the scenes, there is something else: responsibility, accountability, pressure, and sometimes loneliness. So if you're a physician listening to this, know that you're not alone. Many of us are carrying the same weight. I'm Dr. Aisha Rush, and this is Informed and Unfiltered. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also find the Informed and Unfiltered podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Buzzsprout, Podbean, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. You can also find specific obstetrics and gynecology topics on my personal YouTube channel under Dr. Aisha Rush. You can also go to my personal website at draisharush.com. That's draisharush.com to access all podcasts, my YouTube channel, as well as latest news on my book. See you next time, where we will be discussing yet another compelling topic. Thank you so much again for listening. See you soon.